Joining me now, former presidential candidate, Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor, all right, President Trump this morning said he did not want to call the court biased. He was talking to law enforcement officials this morning. He did say courts seem so political. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. He's dead on. I mean, they are political, and they shouldn't be. They have one job, and that job is to determine whether the president has the legal and constitutional authority to do what he did. They really have no business getting into whether they agree with it or not. That's not their job. Their job is not to issue policy declarations. Their job is not to evaluate whether they like the president's ideas, policies, or the implementation. There's only one issue before them. Does he have the authority under both the statutes and the Constitution to make the decisions about national security? And the answer to that by everybody who looks at the Constitution and the statutes dating back to the 50s is yes. He's the only one who has that.
Yeah, and you know, the issue is also, Governor, and you've been talking about this too. We were listening to the line of questioning. I mean, the Washington judge and one of the appeals court judges doubts whether jihadis or terrorists are coming in from the 7 terror hotspots. And we basically looked at the numbers. Remember, this one of the judges says none have been arrested in the U.S. since 9/11. And, Governor, we fact-checked. We found it's not true. The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration found 380 foreign-born terrorists arrested in the U.S. More than 6 dozen came from many of those 7 countries. We know the White House put out its own list. And, Governor, you've been all over this story, too, about what's going on in Europe. 400 migrants who entered Germany as refugees in 2015, 2016, now being investigated for links to Islamic terrorism. What are your thoughts there? It seems like they're treating terror victims like rounding errors, these judges.
Well, it's apparent that they maybe read the newspapers when it's negative to Donald Trump, but they refuse to read the same newspapers when it boldly declares that there have been issues of terrorists coming into this country. But, Liz, let's look at it even in a bigger scale. If there wasn't one person who has been arrested for being a terrorist, the question is still, does the president have the authority to make this decision if he thinks there is a risk of the first terrorist coming? And the answer is yes, he has that authority. So for the justices to say, well, we don't see that there's a big problem. It's not their job to see if it's
Governor,
a big problem.
Governor, stay with me
on
this.
National security briefings.
We've got the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and Trump could lose tomorrow in the coming days. That's the fear. That they are in a limited section of the country setting policy, foreign policy, and national security policy for the entire country, right?
Well, and it's even worse. What they're doing, they're going to uphold, if they do, a single federal district judge in Washington State who made a blanket policy for the entire country. On its face, one appointed black-robed judge has no business overriding the President of the United States. Yes. And I've seen some people who are saying, Donald Trump shouldn't be saying this about the judiciary. Well, newsflash, the judiciary shouldn't be challenging a duly elected president who has the constitutional and statutory authority to protect Americans. We've got these judges who want to protect refugees and immigrants more than they want to protect Americans. Yeah, whose side are they on?
Right, and the judges didn't challenge Obama in 2011 or Jimmy Carter on Iran when there was a visa pause there. Let's move on. Sorry, Governor. The Washington State judge blocking President Trump's travel halt argues that it violates constitutional protections of Muslims who make up the majority of the population of the 7 terror hotspots. However, appeals judge Richard Clifton, an appointee of President George W. Bush, he's saying, Governor, that he sees no evidence that the order was written to target Muslims.
But I have trouble understanding why we're supposed to infer religious animus when, in fact, the vast majority of Muslims would not be affected as residents of those nations, and where the concern for terrorism with those connected with radical Islamic sects is kind of hard to deny.
Your Honor, the case law from this court and the Supreme Court is very clear that to prove religious discrimination, we do not need to prove that this order harms only Muslims or that it harms every Muslim. We just need to prove that it was motivated in part by a desire to harm Muslims. And we have alleged that.
How do you infer that desire if, in fact, the vast majority of Muslims are unaffected?
Well, Your Honor, in part you can infer it from intent evidence. I mean, there are statements that we've quoted in our complaint that are rather shocking evidence of intent to discriminate against Muslims.
All right, Governor, we're talking about 7 countries out of nearly 50 countries that are dominated by this people of this faith. And, you know, it's not a question of the greatness of this faith. It's about jihadis. And, Governor, you've been in the Middle East. I mean, do these 7 Muslim countries that are, many of them are collapsed, they're failed states, and ISIS is running the show in many parts of these countries. Do they allow other religions in? Do you see dominated by Catholics or people of the Jewish faith? I mean, isn't that why they're Muslim dominated? And that's why, you know, people are misinterpreting it as if this is a Muslim ban, right?
Well, exactly. And it's not just the fact that it's a minority of the number of Arab states or Muslim states, nearly 50 of them. This is 7. But the largest population Muslim states, whether it's Egypt or Pakistan or India or Saudi Arabia, they're not even named. So this is nonsense to say that this is specifically targeted to Muslims. It's targeted to places where Islamic terrorism is a hotbed. And I've been to most of the 7 countries, in fact, most of the 50 countries that are named, and it did not single out being Muslim. It singled out having terrorist activities that is uncontrolled in those areas. And I just have to believe that most Americans really do want the President of the United States to put our country first and people who do not have constitutional rights to come here to make them wait. It's not a stop sign. I've said this many times. It's a speed bump. And speed bumps are designed to save lives. The President's trying to save lives. Shouldn't we be grateful for that rather than take him to court?
Yeah, everything you've said, everything I just said have been supported and backed up. People have come on camera here. People of the Muslim faith are saying and agreeing with what you said and what we were just talking about, what is going on with these 7 countries. Thank you, Governor Huckabee. Always great to see you.